So, this is going to sound crazy, but it's true. I didn't really think I'd ever be in a situation where I'd be typing something like this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone will believe me, maybe not. Either way, I can't keep this to myself anymore. It's been eating at me for too long. It all started about a year ago when I was going through one of the worst periods of my life. I was in a bad place mentally. My girlfriend had left me. My job was on the verge of firing me, and I didn't have many friends to talk to. I was just angry. Not at one thing in particular, but at everything. At life. I spent most of my time on the internet because it was easier to zone out there than deal with how shitty my real life was. You ever hear about the dark web? Of course you have. Everyone's heard of it, but most people don't really know what it is. They think it's just some underground part of the internet where hackers hang out, or where you can buy drugs. Well, yeah, that's part of it, but there's so much more. There are forums and services you can't even imagine. And when you're in the wrong headspace like I was, you get curious about just how deep that rabbit hole goes. One night, I was browsing a thread on some shady forum. Nothing special, just people sharing weird links to various websites. I usually ignored them, but one caught my attention. The title was simple but ominous. Hire a cop, no questions asked. At first, I thought it was a joke or some kind of scam, but I clicked it. I mean, who wouldn't? I figured it was some dark web BS, maybe something political or a conspiracy theory site. The page loaded slow, real slow, like it was intentionally crawling along to make me second-guess my decision. But when it finally loaded, it was just a plain, black page with white text in the middle. Hire an officer of the law for your personal needs. Discretion guaranteed.
That was it. No flashy design, no graphics. Just a simple text box for you to enter your request, along with a Bitcoin wallet link at the bottom for payment. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe just a twisted sense of humor I didn't even know I had at the time. I was pissed off at the world, feeling powerless, and here I was, faced with this opportunity to use someone like a cop, someone I could pay to do whatever I wanted. I typed something into the box without even thinking about it. I just wrote, "Find my ex and scare the shit out of her. Make her feel like she's being watched. I know it's messed up, okay?" At the time, I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. I thought maybe it was some dumb prank site, or maybe I was just too high on my own bitterness. After sending it, I closed my laptop and went to bed, figuring that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 days later, I got an email from a random address with the subject line, "Request received." My heart skipped a beat when I opened it. The message was short. "Your request is being processed. Expect results within 48 hours. What the actual hell? I didn't pay anything, and there was no follow-up asking for more details, just that cold, robotic confirmation. A small part of me started to panic, wondering if I had actually set something in motion that I couldn't stop, but I told myself it was probably some weird scam they'd never follow through. For the next 2 days, I was on edge. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done. I kept checking the news, half expecting to hear something crazy about my ex, like she'd been abducted or something. But there was nothing, not a single mention of anything unusual. Then, late one night, 48 hours later, to the minute, I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't a normal knock, though. It was slow, deliberate. 3 heavy knocks in total. I froze, staring at the door from across the room. It was well past midnight. Nobody ever came to my apartment this late, and I didn't even have friends who'd stop by unannounced. My stomach twisted in knots as I approached the peephole. I hesitated before looking through, half expecting to see something, or someone, horrible on the other side. It was a man. He was wearing a police uniform. I could see his badge glinting in the dim light from the hallway. He stood perfectly still, not fidgeting or looking around. Just waiting. The knock had been loud, but now he was eerily silent. I didn't know what to do. My immediate thought was that maybe my ex had reported me for something. Maybe the site was a scam, and now I was in serious trouble for trying to scare her. I backed away from the door, hoping he'd just leave, but he didn't. Another knock, louder this time. I had no choice. I opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaky as hell. I tried to sound calm, but I'm sure he could hear the fear in my voice. The cop didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring through the small gap in the door. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm here for you." I felt my stomach drop. For me? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Before I could say anything else, the door slammed open with a force that sent me stumbling backward. He was in my apartment in an instant, towering over me. I scrambled to get up, but he grabbed me by the shirt and slammed me against the wall. My head hit the drywall so hard that my vision blurred for a second. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, panic rising like a tidal wave.
"You made a request," he said in that same chillingly calm voice, "and I'm here to fulfill it." I was speechless. All I could do was stare at him, my brain struggling to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. "You asked for something," he repeated, tightening his grip on my shirt. "But you're the one who's going to pay." That's when I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't about my ex. This wasn't about scaring her or making her feel watched. This was about me. I had somehow, in my anger and stupidity, set this maniac loose on myself. I tried to scream, but before I could make a sound, his hand was around my throat, squeezing hard enough to make my vision start to fade. "Shh," he whispered. "It'll be easier if you don't struggle." And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a different place. Cold, concrete floor beneath me, hands tied behind my back, a blindfold over my eyes. My head was pounding, and the rope around my wrists bit into my skin every time I moved. I tried to scream for help, but my voice came out weak and hoarse, barely more than a whisper. No one was there to hear me anyway. I had no idea where I was, but it didn't take long for me to realize that I was completely, utterly trapped. When I woke up, my head was pounding like I had the worst hangover of my life. Everything was dark. Not like the kind of dark where your eyes just need a second to adjust. This was pitch black. I couldn't see anything. I was lying on my side and it was freezing cold, like I was on a concrete floor. My hands were tied behind my back with something rough, like thick rope, and my legs were bound together too. I was gagged with something tight around my mouth, but at least the blindfold was off. That's when the panic hit me full force. I started breathing faster, trying to figure out what was happening. I couldn't scream, not with the gag in my mouth, but I tried to shout anyway, muffled noises escaping that sounded more pathetic than anything. My wrists were raw from trying to wriggle out of the ropes, but the more I struggled, the tighter they seemed to get. There was no sound, nothing. Just the deafening silence and my own heavy breathing. I could feel the coldness of the floor sinking into my bones. The last thing I remembered was that cop, or whatever the hell he was, slamming me against the wall, and then nothing. And now I was here, wherever here was. I must have laid there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. Why would anyone do this? What did I get myself into? I couldn't even remember what I'd put on that stupid dark web form exactly, but none of this made sense. I thought I was just being an asshole, sending a random request to scare someone. I never thought it'd turn back on me. Eventually I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, like whoever it was didn't care that I could hear them coming. That's when I knew this was real. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't a bad dream I'd wake up from. This was happening. The sound grew closer, echoing like they were walking down a long hallway. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. Then, I heard the sound of a door creaking open, followed by a dull thud as it closed behind them. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel someone standing nearby. You ever have that feeling like you just know someone's there? That's exactly what it was. The air felt thicker, like the room had suddenly gotten smaller. I didn't hear them speak at first. Just the sound of their breathing, calm and steady, while mine was erratic and panicked. Then, without warning, the gag was ripped from my mouth and I gasped for air, coughing and choking from the sudden rush of cold air. I tried to yell out, but before I could, a hand clamped over my mouth. The hand was ice cold and rough, like the guy had never heard of lotion or something. "Shut up," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "Scream, and you'll regret it." I don't know if it was the tone of his voice or the threat, but I immediately went quiet. There was something about him, something in the way he spoke, that told me he meant every word. I didn't know what he'd do if I disobeyed, but I wasn't about to find out. He slowly removed his hand, and I stayed silent, barely daring to breathe. Then I heard the unmistakable click of a knife being flicked open. My stomach twisted into a knot, and I started shaking, but I couldn't see what was happening. I felt the cold metal of the blade press lightly against my cheek. "You don't talk unless I ask you a question," he said softly. "Understand?" I nodded, my body trembling. The knife moved down my face, sliding along my jawline, then down to my neck, tracing the skin so lightly that it almost tickled. It was like he was playing with me, seeing how far he could push before I broke. And I was already close to breaking. "Good," he muttered. I heard him move behind me, and then I felt the ropes around my wrists loosen. My arms were finally free, but I was too scared to move. I could feel the knife hovering nearby like a threat that was constantly hanging over my head. Then he cut the ropes around my ankles, letting me move for the first time since I woke up. "Sit up," he ordered. I did as I was told, slowly pushing myself up into a sitting position. My whole body ached, my muscles stiff from lying on that freezing floor for so long. My head was spinning, and I had no idea what he was going to do next. I still couldn't see him. There were no lights, nothing to give me any sense of where I was, except for the echo of our breathing and the cold air clinging to my skin. "Do you remember why you're here?" he asked, his voice calm and almost mocking. I tried to answer, but my throat was dry, and all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. "No, I don't." He laughed softly, like I'd just told him the punchline to a joke. "Of course you don't. That's the problem with people like you. You go looking for trouble, thinking it'll never find you." "What do you want?" I finally managed to croak out. My voice sounded pathetic, like I was already resigned to whatever this psycho had planned. He didn't answer right away. Instead, I felt him grab me by the hair, yanking my head back painfully. The knife was back against my throat now, pressing just hard enough for me to feel its presence, but not enough to break the skin. My pulse was hammering so fast, I thought my heart was going to give out right then and there. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to teach you a lesson. You're going to learn what it feels like to be powerless. You're going to learn what it's like when no one is coming to save you." I couldn't think of anything to say. I just sat there, frozen, waiting for whatever was coming next. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what he meant by a lesson. The worst part was that I had no idea what this guy was capable of. I couldn't even see his face. It was like being trapped in some nightmare where every fear I'd ever had was coming true, one by one. Suddenly, the knife moved from my throat, and I heard the click of a flashlight. A dim light filled the room, revealing a basement. It was small and bare, just concrete walls and a single door at the far end. The guy standing over me was wearing a police uniform, just like before, but now I could see his face. He looked normal, like painfully normal. Mid-40s, short dark hair, clean-shaven, with an expression that didn't fit the situation at all. He could have been anyone, your neighbor, your friend's dad, the guy who bags your groceries. But his eyes, they were cold, empty, like he'd done this a million times and didn't feel a thing anymore. "Get up," he commanded, his voice losing some of that eerie calmness. I struggled to stand, my legs weak from lying there so long. As soon as I was up, he grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the door. I stumbled forward, nearly falling over, but he caught me and shoved me through the doorway into another smaller room. This one had a chair in the center, bolted to the floor with straps on the arms and legs. "Sit down," he ordered again. I hesitated, looking at the chair, knowing nothing good could come from sitting in that thing. But what choice did I have? He had the knife, the control, everything. I slowly lowered myself into the chair, and before I knew it, he had my wrists and ankles strapped in tight. I couldn't move. "Now," he said, stepping back and smiling in a way that made my stomach turn, "the real fun begins." As soon as the straps tightened around my wrists and ankles, I knew I was screwed. There was no way I was getting out of that chair. The restraints were bolted in place, and every time I tugged or twisted, the leather dug into my skin. I could barely wiggle my fingers, let alone break free. The guy had tied me down like he'd done this 1,000 times before, with a kind of practiced efficiency that made me sick. The basement was still cold as hell, and I started to shiver, but it wasn't just from the temperature. It was the fear, the kind of bone-deep terror that makes you feel like you're about to lose your mind. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm myself down, but my heart was hammering so hard in my chest, it felt like it was going to burst. The flashlight's weak beam was the only light in the room, casting long shadows on the concrete walls, flickering slightly as the guy moved around. I don't know why, but he just stood there for a while, staring at me like I was some kind of puzzle he was trying to figure out. He didn't say anything, didn't make any sudden moves, just watched. The silence was unbearable. My brain started racing, trying to guess what he was going to do next. Was he going to kill me, torture me, leave me here to rot? I didn't know, and that uncertainty made it so much worse.
Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "You think you're special, don't you?" he said, his voice flat, almost bored. "Like all the other idiots who go looking for things they don't understand." I didn't know how to respond, so I just kept my mouth shut. I figured anything I said would only make things worse. "That website," he continued, pacing around the room slowly, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. "It's a trap. It's always been a trap. People like you think you can just click a button and hire someone to do your dirty work. You think you can stay safe behind your screen and make other people suffer. But that's not how it works." He stopped right in front of me, crouching down so we were eye level. His face was still blank, his eyes empty like a shark's. It didn't feel like I was looking at a person, more like some kind of predator wearing a human skin. "You're the one who made the request," he said quietly, "but you never thought about the consequences. You didn't care what would happen. You didn't think about what you were inviting into your life." "I didn't mean—" I started to say, but he cut me off, standing up so fast it made me flinch. "Doesn't matter what you meant," he snapped, his calm facade cracking just a little. "You wanted this. You asked for it. Now you're going to deal with it." I was shaking, barely able to think straight. I wanted to beg, to tell him I'd do anything if he just let me go, but my throat felt like it was closing up. The words wouldn't come out. I was frozen in that chair, helpless, while he circled me like some kind of predator. Then he did something I'll never forget. He walked over to a table in the corner of the room, one I hadn't noticed before in the dim light. On it were various tools, screwdrivers, pliers, a hammer, some other things I couldn't make out right away. He picked up a pair of wire cutters, casually flipping them open and shut as he came back toward me. "See, here's the thing," he said, twirling the cutters in his hand like they were nothing special. "You hired a cop, didn't you? You thought you could use someone with power to get what you wanted. But here's what you don't get. I have the power now. I'm the one calling the shots." He knelt down again, grabbing my left hand where it was strapped to the arm of the chair. He held it up, turning it over like he was inspecting it, then slid the wire cutters over the tip of my pinky finger. My heart nearly stopped. "You've got 10 fingers," he said, tightening the cutters just enough that I could feel the pressure. 10 chances to prove you've learned something." I started shaking my head, trying to plead with my eyes, but I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry and every muscle in my body was tensed, bracing for what I knew was coming. "First question," he said calmly, as if he was a teacher giving a pop quiz. "Why did you make the request?" I don't know," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. I was angry. I wasn't thinking. Snap! The cutters closed with a sickening crunch, and my world exploded into pain. It felt like my entire hand was on fire. I screamed so loud it hurt my throat, but the pain drowned out everything else. I couldn't even process what had just happened at first. It wasn't until I looked down that I realized my pinky was gone. Blood was pouring from the stump, pooling onto the floor beneath the chair. "You're lying," he said calmly, standing up again and wiping the cutters off with a rag he pulled from his pocket. "That's not the real reason. Let's try again." I was gasping for air, the pain blurring my vision, but I tried to focus. I needed to say something, anything to make him stop. "I was mad at my ex," I blurted out, tears streaming down my face. I just wanted her to feel what I was feeling. I didn't think it would turn into this." He smiled, a cold, empty smile that made my blood run cold. "Better," he said, "but not good enough." He moved to my other hand, this time placing the cutters over my ring finger. I started hyperventilating, the panic overwhelming any rational thought I had left. Wait, please," I begged, my voice cracking. I'm sorry, please don't." He didn't even give me time to finish the sentence. Snap. The pain was so intense I nearly passed out. My whole body went limp in the chair, my mind unable to process what was happening anymore. The blood was everywhere now, dripping down my arms, soaking into my clothes. I could hear it splattering on the floor beneath me, mixing with the tears and sweat pouring off me. "You still don't get it," he said, shaking his head like he was disappointed. "This isn't just about you. You think you're the only one I've done this to? You think you're special?" He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, stale and rancid, like he hadn't eaten in days. "There's a whole network of people out there," he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "People who are watching this right now. They're paying for this, paying to see what happens when someone like you gets what they deserve." My blood turned to ice. What the hell was he talking about? "Oh yeah," he said, seeing the look on my face. "This isn't just between us. There's an audience, and they're enjoying this. They want to see how far you'll go before you break, how much pain you can take before you beg for death." I wanted to throw up. I could feel the bile rising in my throat, but I couldn't do anything except sit there, trapped, helpless, while this monster played with me like I was his personal toy. He stood up, putting the wire cutters back on the table, then picked up something else, a syringe. "Let's make this a little more interesting, shall we?" he said, flicking the needle with his finger. "Don't worry, this won't kill you, but it'll make sure you stay awake for the rest of our little game."
I thrashed in the chair, trying desperately to free myself, but it was no use. He grabbed my arm and jabbed the needle in without hesitation, the liquid burning as it entered my bloodstream. Almost immediately my head cleared, the pain from my fingers becoming sharper, more intense. I felt wide awake, hyper-aware of every agonizing throb. "There we go," he said, stepping back to admire his work. "Now let's see how much fun we can have." The second that drug hit my veins, everything became horrifyingly clear. The fog that pain had shrouded me in disappeared, and I was left with nothing but raw, agonizing awareness. The pain in my mutilated fingers throbbed like a sick pulse, but I couldn't pass out, couldn't escape it. It was like my body had been rebooted to feel everything. I was trembling uncontrollably, but not from the cold anymore. It was the fear, the absolute certainty that I wasn't going to survive this. And even worse, if I did survive, I'd be left a broken shell of whatever I used to be. I looked up at him through blurry eyes, still not fully understanding what the hell he meant about an audience. My mind kept spinning, grasping at some explanation that didn't make everything worse, but there wasn't one. He was toying with me, and every second felt like he was winding up for something even more horrific. "You're probably wondering about that little audience I mentioned," he said, his voice casual, almost conversational now. "Don't worry, you'll get a chance to meet them soon enough." He turned and walked over to the far side of the room, where there was a small shelf. He rummaged through something I couldn't see, and when he turned back around, he was holding a laptop. I almost laughed out of sheer disbelief. A laptop? In a basement where he was literally torturing me. None of this made sense anymore, but I didn't have the mental energy left to try and make it make sense. He set the laptop down on the table in front of me, tilting the screen so I could see it. The screen was already on, some kind of live stream window pulled up. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was looking at. There were chat messages, hundreds of them, scrolling by faster than I could even read. Cut off another one. Dude's about to piss himself. Is he crying? Ha ha ha. My stomach twisted in knots as I stared at the screen, the realization hitting me like a freight train. This wasn't just some private torture session. He wasn't just messing with me. There were people, actual sick, twisted people, watching this unfold. They were paying to see it happen. My humiliation, my fear, my pain. It was all part of some sick show for them, and they were loving it. I started to hyperventilate. The panic was overwhelming. My breaths were coming too fast, and I thought I might pass out. But the drug he'd injected me with kept me from slipping into the darkness I so desperately wanted. He grinned, seeing the look on my face. "There it is," he said, stepping closer to me again. "That's the fear they love to see. You're putting on quite the performance, and they're paying top dollar for it." I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want to give him or those monsters watching the satisfaction, but I couldn't help it. I broke. "Why?" I finally managed to croak out, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head slightly, as if the question confused him. "Why?" he repeated, almost laughing. "Why not? People like you, people who think they can just hide behind a screen and get away with anything, you deserve this. You think the world owes you something, but here's the truth. The world doesn't care about you. But these people," he gestured to the screen, "they care about the entertainment." I felt bile rising in my throat again. It was too much. The idea that there were people out there, faceless strangers, who got off on this, it was too much. I wanted to scream, to fight, to rip myself out of that chair, but I was too weak, too broken. Suddenly, the chat slowed down, and I saw a new message appear, highlighted in a bright yellow box. It stood out from the rest, and I could tell it was a message from someone important. "Double the payment if you break his legs next. Let's make this interesting." I froze. My body went rigid, the panic climbing into my throat like a scream that wouldn't come out. He read the message too, and I could see the smile spreading across his face. It was a slow, deliberate smile, like he was savoring the moment. "Well, looks like we've got a special request," he said, walking back over to the table and picking up a crowbar that had been resting against the wall. He swung it around lazily, like it was nothing more than a toy to him, but I could see the weight behind it, the way his muscles flexed as he held it. "No, please," I whimpered, barely able to get the words out. "Please, I'll do anything, just don't." He didn't even respond. He didn't need to. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was just a thing, a plaything, a spectacle for the sick bastards watching from who knows where. He took his time walking back over to me, the crowbar dragging along the floor, scraping against the concrete with a sound that made my teeth ache. My whole body was shaking now, uncontrollably. I tried to pull my legs away, but the straps held tight, leaving me completely exposed and vulnerable. He stood in front of me, raising the crowbar in one hand, and I could see it glint in the dim light. My mind raced, trying to prepare for the pain I knew was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Without a word, he brought the crowbar down on my right shin with all the force he could muster. Crack. The sound of my bone breaking was so loud, it echoed in the small basement room. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like my leg had been set on fire. I screamed, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. It tore through the gag he'd stuffed back in my mouth and reverberated off the walls. I couldn't stop screaming. The pain was like nothing I'd ever felt in my life, and it just wouldn't stop. I thrashed in the chair, trying to pull my leg away, but it was no use. The strap held tight and I could barely move. The broken bone jutted out under my skin, swelling up, making my leg look deformed. The chat exploded. Holy shit! That sound, though. Do it again. Do the other one. I wanted to die. I wanted it to just end. But he wasn't done. Oh, they're loving this, he said, looking at the chat with a sick grin. And I have to admit, I'm having fun too. He raised the crowbar again, and I tried to plead with him through the gag, but it was useless. The words came out as nothing more than garbled noises, and he didn't care. Crack.
He brought the crowbar down on my left leg this time, shattering the bone just like the other one. The pain was blinding. My vision went white for a moment, and I thought for sure I was going to black out. But the drug, whatever the hell he'd injected me with, kept me conscious, kept me feeling everything. I felt my entire body trembling uncontrollably, my head spinning as shock started to set in. My legs were ruined, twisted at unnatural angles, and the pain radiating from them was so intense that I could hardly breathe. I could hear the chat in the background, the sick, twisted messages from people who were enjoying every second of my suffering. He leaned in close again, his breath hot against my ear. "You see now," he whispered. "This is what happens when you think you can get away with anything. This is what happens when you forget that there are consequences." I couldn't respond. I was beyond words, beyond thought. All I could do was exist in the agony, trapped in that chair, unable to move, unable to scream. And then he stepped back, looking at me with that same empty smile. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We're just getting started." I don't know how long I stayed conscious after he broke my legs. The pain blurred the passage of time into something unreal. Seconds felt like hours, and hours felt like an eternity. My mind kept slipping in and out of awareness, but the damn drug wouldn't let me pass out completely. It forced me to stay awake, to feel every second of it. I could barely see through the haze of pain. My body was in shock, trembling uncontrollably, but I could still hear everything. The soft clicking of the laptop keys, the muted hum of the live stream as more messages popped up on the screen. Those sick bastards were still watching, still enjoying every bit of this. At some point, I heard him speak again, though his voice felt distant, like it was coming from underwater. "They want more," he said, his tone calm as ever. "You've really made an impression tonight." I tried to focus, tried to understand what he was saying, but everything was slipping away. My legs were ruined. I couldn't move. My fingers. God, I couldn't even feel my fingers anymore, just a dull, throbbing ache where they used to be. I heard the sound of a metal chair scraping across the floor. He dragged it closer to me and sat down, like he was getting comfortable for the final act. His face was calm, almost serene, like he was just having a normal conversation with a friend. "You know, most people don't make it this far," he said, lighting a cigarette and taking a long drag. The smoke curled up around him, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. "Usually, they either pass out or, well, they don't survive the first few rounds." He exhaled slowly, blowing the smoke in my face. I could barely breathe as it filled my lungs, mixing with the blood I could taste in my mouth. I felt like I was suffocating. "But you..." He looked me over like he was appraising a piece of art. "You've held on longer than most. That's impressive." I didn't feel impressive. I felt broken, utterly destroyed, and beyond any hope of escape. There was no fight left in me. I wanted to scream, to beg him to just end it already, but the gag in my mouth made it impossible to form words. Even if I could, I don't think he would have cared. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, cigarette dangling from his lips. "You know what's funny?" he asked, staring at me with those cold, dead eyes. "You still don't get it. Even after all this, you haven't figured it out." He stood up, walking around behind me again, and I felt his hand on my shoulder, squeezing it just enough to send a jolt of pain through my entire body. My breath caught in my throat, and I winced, trying not to scream again. "It's not just about you," he whispered in my ear, his voice low and dripping with malice. "It never was. You're just a pawn, a little piece in a much bigger game." I didn't understand what he was talking about. My thoughts were too scattered, too lost in the agony to make sense of anything. I just wanted it to end. He stepped away from me again, moving toward the laptop. I heard the soft click of keys being pressed, the sound of him typing something. The live stream chat exploded with messages, and I could feel the excitement, the sick anticipation from those watching. "Let's give them a proper finale, shall we?" he said, grinning as he turned the laptop screen toward me. That's when I saw it. On the screen, I wasn't the only one in that small, dark basement. There was another video feed, split in half with mine. It showed my apartment. The same apartment I'd left 2 days ago, not knowing I'd never return. The camera was positioned perfectly to show the front door. But that wasn't what made my heart stop. There was someone in my apartment. A figure, dressed in black, standing right in front of the door. They had a bag slung over their shoulder, like they'd just broken in. But what made the bile rise in my throat was the fact that the camera zoomed in on a picture frame on the table near the door. It was a photo of me and my ex. I felt sick, my stomach twisting into knots as I realized what was happening. "You thought you were the only target?" he asked, his voice filled with amusement. "You were just the first stop. You made a request, remember? You wanted your ex to feel like she was being watched, to be scared." He turned the screen back toward him and chuckled softly. "Well, guess what? You're getting exactly what you asked for." I could see the chat lighting up again, the messages pouring in faster than ever. "No way! Is he really going to do it? Holy shit, I'm going to pay double for this. This is the best show yet." I struggled against the restraints, desperate to scream, desperate to warn her. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't do anything. I was trapped, completely powerless. He stepped back in front of me, watching my reaction with that sick, twisted smile. "Relax," he said, as if trying to comfort me. "You won't have to worry about her for long. We're sending someone to take care of her, the same way we took care of you." I couldn't believe it. I couldn't breathe. They weren't just after me. This whole thing was bigger, more twisted than I could have ever imagined, and it was all my fault. I'd set this in motion. I'd opened the door to this nightmare. He tapped the screen again, showing me a final message that made my blood turn to ice. Time for the real fun to begin. Before I could process what that meant, the lights in the basement flickered and the room was plunged into darkness. I heard the sound of a door creaking open, somewhere close. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized that we weren't alone anymore. Someone else had entered the room. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. The heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the darkness, moving closer to me. Panic seized me again and I thrashed in the chair, desperate to free myself, but it was no use. The restraints held tight, and I was trapped, helpless, at their mercy. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. I could hear the faint rustle of clothes, the soft sound of breathing. Whoever it was, they were just standing there, watching me. And then, without warning, the blindfold slipped over my eyes, plunging me into complete, suffocating darkness. The last thing I heard was his voice, calm and quiet, as if he were whispering a secret. This is the part they'll remember. And then, the pain began again.